Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Date in a Blink, where we're joined by Jillian Richardson, a coach, connection expert, and author of best-selling book on Lonely Planet.
Modern dating sucks, but it doesn't have to. Here on the Date in a Blink podcast, you'll listen in on 10-minute voice-only speed dates between strangers. The experience is designed to move people beyond mindless swiping and marathon messaging. Our position on online dating? It's time to stop collecting pen pals and start, going on actual dates.
Online dating? That actually involves dating? Is that even a thing anymore? But for real, dating should be fun. We hope listening in inspires you all to try new ways of meeting people. Tune in every other week to hear a new couple go on a date. In between, we'll talk to relationship experts about how the date went and what we can learn from it.
Will our handpicked podcast matches find love on these Blink dates? Or will they say goodbye to each other after 10 minutes and never look back? Tune in to find out.
Before we jump into today's episode, here's a quick word from our sponsors.
If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain a bit. It's totally free, and Anchor will distribute the podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and lots of other podcasting platforms. Not only that, but it has creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. It also lets you make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make your podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Today on Date in a Blink, we're joined by Jillian Richardson, a coach, connection expert, and author of best-selling book on Lonely Planet. Through workshops, interviews, and public speaking events, Jillian helps people develop skills that enable a deeper connection with themselves and others. She's presented at various global conferences, been featured as a source for publications such as The Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, and NBC, and is a certified coach through Coach Training Alliance. In addition to this, Jillian successfully launched The Joy List, a weekly newsletter of over 6,500 subscribers that strives to reduce loneliness in New York City through community-centered events. On her website, Jillian reminds us that connection is our birthright and it starts from within. Hi, Jillian. We are thrilled to host you today and learn more about your background as a coach, connection expert, and best-selling author, and of course, to chat about Quinn and Brianna's date. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I love having my Esther Perel moment right now.
Yes, you're going to be the future Esther Perel. I know it. So diving in, on your website, you write that connection is our birthright and it starts from within. Can you explain a bit about what that means and why it's such an important thing to remember?
Yeah, so I really feel like our natural way of being in the world is feeling connected to ourselves, to our bodies, to our soul, feeling connected to other people, feeling connected to love. And then all of these things kind of make us unlearn those natural lessons. We feel disconnected from our bodies because of diet culture. We believe that we're not enough. We have all these fears that people won't accept us or love us. And all these things kind of become barriers to get in the way of what naturally comes to us, which is love and connection. And I was speaking at a hotel recently and a woman came up to me and she was like, I think all of your work is really around the art of unlearning all of these harmful lessons that we're taught. And I really feel like that's a great way to kind of sum it up.
Mm-hmm. I think you're totally right. It's crazy how many things we learn just by existing in the world that really don't serve us. And the process of erasing those and kind of retraining ourselves is a journey. And it has to be like a very conscious one.
Mm-hmm.
There's a statistic that you often bring up when you're talking about loneliness. And I'm trying to thread the connection here between, there's this concept of connection and it's starting from within, but then also the sense of loneliness. And so the stat that you bring up is 75% of adults feel unsatisfied with their friendships. And I'm curious, what do you think is at the root of this dissatisfaction?
Well, I think one is that people don't take the time to learn the skills to feel really connected in their relationships. I think a lot of people are on autopilot because it's not something we're culturally taught that we should learn. Like kind of when it comes to friendship, especially friendship, we're taught that like, oh, you should just know how to do that. If you spend any time learning about these skills, you're kind of weird or there's something socially wrong with you. When in reality, we need to learn friendship skills just like we need to learn romantic skills.
It's true. And I think this actually leads really well into the next question. So many people feel a desire for that strong sense of connection. And it gets so discouraging when we're looking for it because we might, briefly connect with a friend of a friend or go on a couple of dates with a person and find that the connection fizzles out. So what advice would you have for someone pursuing and maintaining a connection? And how can we learn how to make those deep connections?
Man, it's so hard. I'm literally in a moment of that right now. I can be more on the anxious attachment side of things. And the early stages of relationships are always so difficult because there's so much unknown. There's so much like, oh, am I weird if I reach out to you? Do I communicate too much? What if I never hear from them again? You haven't figured out like your rhythm of communication yet. And just to be kind with yourself, that like it's so human to feel vulnerable, especially when you're just starting to get to know a friend or a romantic partner. And as unpleasant and difficult as it sounds, to try and sit with that part of you that feels really scared. Because it's really like this young part of ourselves. Ooh, I just activated my Siri.
Siri wants to get in action.
she's like, oh yeah, let me help with that. So funny. There's this young part of ourselves that it's like the little kindergartner that's afraid that kids don't want to sit with her at lunch and just like wants someone to play with and feels left out if the other kids don't play with her. Like, we all have that part of ourselves. And I think in those kind of activated moments of not totally knowing where you stand with someone, we can really benefit from doing that. And I also say that literally to remind myself.
Yeah. I just saw a TikTok where a woman was saying that she realized she thinks she's a lot closer to people than other people think they are to her. So she'll think, we spent 12 hours together working on this set. I think we're best friends now. And then she realizes when she sees them the next time, they're just kind of like, hey, that her perception of their connection was much different from their perception of the connection. And it's just interesting because like you said, it's just, that little girl being like, do they want to hang out with me? Do they think I'm cool? Do they want to sit with me? Why not? If not, and we can take ourselves on these really, sad journeys sometimes, as we look for connection. So yeah, Laura, were you going to say something? I heard you make a small noise.
Yeah, I actually was going to echo a lot of what you said as well. And one thing that this is having me think about is I think online connection can really get a bad rap for all of the negatives that it causes in the world. But I just wanted to share something from my own experience. I grew up in a small town. I never really felt like I fit in. And so it's like when you're talking about, being the little girl who's like, oh, nobody wants to play with me when you're 5 years old. It's a really isolating experience and it really stinks. And it is something that a lot of us will carry with us if we were that child that was kind of that loner or the person who felt a little bit left out for whatever reason. And so I just appreciate so much the internet and being able to find these online spaces that have in many cases formed into real life, real beautiful friendships around shared mutual interests that I otherwise never would have been able to create. And so I think for
me.
Yes, exactly. Like you.
We met on Instagram.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah. And so I think something that I want to, as a reminder for myself and a reminder for our listeners as well, is that online dating gets a bad rap for very valid reasons. Meeting people online gets an interesting rap for a variety of reasons. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with recognizing that there are billions of people on this planet, and there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who would absolutely kill to be your friend, to be your lover, to be your partner. And as much as it's not a numbers game in the sense of, dealing with the paradox of choice and endlessly swiping on these really deeply personal connections, sometimes it is as simple as, it's okay that we're not passing the vibe check with each other. I'm going to do what I can up until a point. And then once we kind of hit a tipping point or we go over where I'm comfortable with my own thresholds, then I'll continue on this journey to find people that it's work, but it's not hard work. And it's not work that we're both unwilling to do, whether it's a friendship or a romantic relationship. And so yeah, anyway, this is just all these like emotions are coming up for me of how truly grateful I am to live in a society that is this global community and to find these spaces where people love the weird quirks about you and they view the things that are a little bit weird as quirky, fun, endearing, as opposed to weird and off-putting.
That's exactly a point that I try and make in interviews, because I think when folks ask me about loneliness and about technology specifically, they're often waiting for me to be like, technology is ruining our connections and our relationships. And I find that the people who often pose that question come from a lot of pretty socially normative circles. Like maybe like they're straight, they're like their body is totally healthy, they don't have any mental health issues, they're straight. I don't know if I just said that or not, but yeah. They're like, yeah, all of the ways that I express myself, I'm fine just finding those people in the world because that's safe for me. And yet there's all of these communities, like maybe you're homebound and you're ill and you can't leave your house to meet people. Maybe you're gay in a state where you don't feel safe expressing that openly. Maybe you have a mental health issue that your family doesn't understand. Like there's all these reasons why having online community is really powerful and really beautiful. And yeah, it just bugs me when people diminish them so much.
Yeah. It's like, oh, that's the place where all the weird people go to connect. And it's like, well, yeah, but you have no idea how validating it is to feel like if you've never felt that loneliness, if you've never felt like there's not a space for you physically in what you see around you, it is so powerful and moving to find a community of people that are right there alongside with you. And actually, as you're sharing this, I feel very seen by what you're saying. And it's like very moving for me and very validating. So I really I cannot thank you enough for, kind of beating that drum when people essentially say, oh, technology is destroying our lives, and to say like, it doesn't have to.
Completely. It's both sides of the coin. Like yesterday, I was avoiding a feeling and just like was on my phone way more than was actually good for my mental health. And then today I was like, man, what was going on yesterday? Like, I was like, oh, I was avoiding a feeling. That's what was happening.
Yeah.
So we talked about this a tiny bit, and then we kind of moved into the, online community, and, the double-edged sword nature of it. But if we're thinking about that little girl on the playground, or, even us in our adult lives and going out on dates and having temporary connections, I'm curious if you have any advice for how we can think about those temporary fleeting connections that, are really strong and then they fizzle out, and how we can process that in a healthy way.
Yeah, I'm laughing to myself because I'm forgetting where I read this. It might have been in a book on internal family systems. It might have been a TikTok. The variety of depth of where I got this piece of info from is wide. But it's this idea of what would someone who had a secure attachment style do in this moment? Because it just makes me laugh because it's so simple. But I find the people who are obsessed with relationships, myself included, are usually the ones who are more anxiously attached. Like there's not a lot of dating advice out there for people who are avoidantly attached because they just don't care to grow that skill set. And then folks who are securely attached, it comes so naturally to them that there's not as much deep interest in like relational work. And so for me, what's really helpful is calling to mind a friend who like had the blessing of a very secure family and has a very secure attachment style, and what she would say if you go on 2 dates and you never hear from them again and you're bummed because you think you had a great connection. Like, what would she say? And she'd probably just be like, well, clearly they're not as interested in me as I would want a partner to be. So why would I keep going on dates with them?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, wow, that's such a healthy perspective that doesn't involve me telling myself that I'm like not a good person.
Oh, I think that's so incredibly relatable. And I think that really feeds into, I think, such a natural, I don't know how we as humans have developed this fear of rejection. so many things make sense to me, tapping into fight or flight when people are entering their reptile brain. All those things make sense to me from an evolutionary perspective and standpoint. But like this fear of rejection, I'm trying to figure out why this is something that is so deeply powerful. And so I really feel like that fear, that hesitancy plays into people's desire to even go and seek out connection and community, because it's so hard to shake those voices. And when you hear that internal talk track saying, what if they don't like me? What if I don't belong? And so I'm curious, what advice do you have for learning to ignore those voices and move past that fear?
Yeah, I think one is to really get curious about those voices and kind of sense check what it is that they're saying. Because I find, and I've really seen this in my coaching clients, the better we are at handling rejection, the more we know we have the skills and the tool set to work through it without falling into this place of super flagellating ourselves, the more likely we are to put ourselves out there. Because we know, the more I put myself out there, the more likely I am to get rejected, and the more likely I am to get what I want. And I know I can handle it when inevitably someone isn't interested in me. And so some things that are helpful are, one, to just think about what are the reasons why you haven't been interested in someone in the past? A lot of the time, it's not anything egregious. It's not something huge. It's just they felt more like a friend, or just, we went on 3 dates and that romantic energy just wasn't there. A lot of the time, it's just kind of this chemical thing that we have no control over, and that it's really just in our benefit to think about it from the most positive place of I encourage clients to think of something silly, if they don't get any feedback on why the person wasn't interested, be well, maybe I look like their mom, or well,
I love that.
Maybe I'm just my sense of humor is so good that they're threatened, whatever. Because well, if you're never going to know, you might as well make it something that makes you feel good.
I love that. It's interesting to hear you talk about the concept of rejection that way, because I'm thinking about it also in terms of other parts of our lives. As an example, Laura and I, we apply for all sorts of grants and opportunities and programs. We apply for so many that I forget after we've applied which ones we've applied to, so that if we get rejected, I'm just oh, right. I didn't even remember that, because I've applied to 30 more in the interim, because I'm just we're putting ourselves out there. And just because one says no doesn't mean another one won't say yes. And to be honest, we've had several say yes, and those have been incredible opportunities, and saying yes to a different one might have taken us away from those other ones. And so seeing it as I'm just going to put ourselves out there and we're going to see what sticks, and the opportunities that come our way are going to be really incredible for us. And the doors that are closed weren't meant for us. And it just softens the blow of rejection, because we also get the acceptances, because we are putting ourselves out there, and we're putting ourselves out there so much that we don't put so much value on each individual opportunity. And so I think it's just really interesting to kind of take that concept of rejection and see it in those different aspects of our lives, because I think in dating, the stakes feel so much higher. But if you think about it in a similar way as, work opportunities, or I don't know, if you're thinking about it in social opportunities or whatever, it makes you think about how they're parallel and can help you potentially detach that really high kind of stakes nature feeling of it in the dating context.
That's exactly right. And I realized where I got the idea of, what would a securely attached person say? I got it from the book Attached. I devoured that book in 2 days, a classic anxiously attached person. I'm let me read this book on attachment theory in 48 hours, so I will be healed forever.
I feel I need to read it now.
Yeah, it's really good. It's just a primer on how to handle being in your attachment style and understanding different attachment styles. But for folks who are more anxiously attached or can get anxiously attached depending on different situations, it really, really recommends dating multiple people at once, which I can find really challenging. When I meet someone who I like, my first instinct is to be well, why would I go out with anyone else? This person's great. When in reality, I have no idea yet if we're going to work out. I have no idea yet if they're dating other people. They probably are. We're in New York City. it's not fair to myself. And also it makes it easier for me to be present with the other person I'm with if I know like, okay, I'm not putting all of my brain focus on this one person. And also to just maintain my life, like have my friends, go to events, do other stuff, because otherwise I'm going to spin out on this poor one person who like doesn't realize I am putting so much brain energy into them.
I think that's so true. And just as and I know, Jillian, you live in New York too. I think there's one extra challenge, and I actually have a secondary question on this in a moment. The challenge in seeing lots of people is sometimes our lives feel so busy that how can we like squeeze in seeing multiple people when sometimes it feels like a burden to like put yourself out there to meet just one person. And I think hearing what you said at the end there is like, make sure that you still see your friends and that you're still doing the things you love. And all of those other things can still also be those, like you're not losing yourself in that one person. And I think that's really important. So even if you can't, squeeze in dates with multiple people because your life is really busy, you can still make sure that you are not putting all of your eggs in that person's basket and you are still maintaining parts of yourself so that if it doesn't work out, because, statistically it probably won't because there are billions of people out there and, you still have yourself and you don't have to feel like it was, you don't have to have felt like that basket, all of those eggs are broken because you have some in your friend basket, your hobby basket, your work basket, wherever it is that you've put them.
Yeah. And how hard that can feel, like you said, like it totally is difficult to balance all of those things. And that like there is no perfect balance. I find for myself sometimes I'll like suddenly for some reason I match with a few people and we actually manage to make plans and meet up in person. And I'm like, oh, okay. So like right now I'm on a wave where maybe I am going to go on 3 dates in 1 week. And then the next 2 weeks I have no dates. And then after that, I do have 3 dates in a week. And like, that's okay. It's so messy. There's no perfect formula for it.
Yes. So this actually, like I said, I have another question for you about dating in cities. And maybe this is unique to cities because they are so big and there's always so much going on. But there's this same sort of paradox of choice that happens when it comes to communities and events as it does with people on dating apps, because there's so many things to do and people to meet that it can be daunting and it can be hard to know where to begin. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how to best sift through options to find a good fit when you are looking for, connection, whether it's romantic or community or whatever it may be.
Oh, okay. You can't see me. I'm grinning really big. I love this question because I find so many people, men and women and everyone, can make their profile, like a dating profile, very generic because they want to appeal to as many people as possible and they don't want to say anything that'll scare people off. But I find it's best to include things that will scare the wrong people off, like say things that will intentionally filter people out. So what I find really interesting is I'm on Bumble and I'll find like, I'll match with someone and I'll send them a message and then they like immediately unmatch me or they don't respond. And my assumption is, they actually went back and read my profile and there's something in there that they didn't like. Cause just, so many people swipe without reading people's profiles. And so in mine, I include that I don't drink alcohol. I include that I don't want kids. I include that I'm 6 feet tall. I include that I'm looking for a long-term relationship. So I'm like, I mean, business. Like, if you don't like any of these things, you're not like, if you drink a ton, if you're looking for something casual, if you don't want a really tall woman, like you're going to not say hi.
Oh, I have a question for you. I have a really good friend who is over 6 feet tall. And it's so funny because she personally does not care. So she's heterosexual, so she dates men. And it was so funny. I was talking with her because one of the things I love about working in the dating space is everybody shares with us their dating stories. And I am so here for it because I love dating. I love love and I love real authentic love, all that fun stuff. And it's just so interesting. And I'm wondering if you've had a similar experience where she said that she never wants to put a filter on height, but she has gone on so many dates with men who were shorter than her, who it was just such a problem for them. And so I'm curious.
Oh.
Yeah. She's like, I have no problem dating shorter guys. I love shorter guys. The problem is that a lot of them are just like, they get so intimidated by her height or they're like, cause she's 6'4", I think.
Oh my God, a queen.
Yeah,
Yes.
1000%. Yeah. And she is like drop dead gorgeous and she loves wearing heels, loves getting dressed up. And she's like, I am not going to not wear heels for whoever I'm with. And it's been something that she's broken up with people because they were like, you can't wear heels with me because I feel emasculated. Yeah, I know. It makes me so sad. So because I was sharing. Yeah. Yeah. And so that's one of the things that I know, Talene, we've talked about this a couple of times. You know, how do we strike that balance? Because a height filter, I think, makes sense height filters don't make sense in general because like off by a couple inches, who cares? But I'm noticing that for taller women, it's a completely different dating experience because of you know, that, I don't know, I want to say like the patriarchy, toxic masculinity, all these sorts of things that are systemic that we just breathe. So I'm curious, Jillian, if you've had like a similar experience in your dating life.
I love this topic because there's so many kind of subtle gender things in here. Like for me, my last boyfriend I think he was maybe 5'9" and I'm 6 feet tall. So I'm totally fine dating someone who's shorter than me. Like, I think the most important thing is the energy of the person. And like you said, if they're comfortable being with a woman who's taller than them, because to me, that's like a sign of being really comfortable in yourself, is not caring that that's true. And like the amount of times a guy has said to me like, wow, I've never been on a date with a woman who's this tall. And meanwhile, they might be 6'2" or 6'3". And I'm like, what? You've never been on a woman who's still shorter than you? Like, what are you talking about? Do you always go out with women who are like 5'4" and you look like a huge giant next to? Yeah. It's something my mom and I, because my mom's 5'11" or 5'10", is we would always see these like really petite women with these really tall men, and we'd always get mad. Like,
don't make it. I'm 5'4". I'm dating with someone who's 6'4".
And we're like, oh my God, you're taking them away from the tall women.
To be honest, I didn't care. I dated men who were 5'7", 5 whatever, but I don't know. Love, to me, the height has nothing to do with it. And I do feel a little bit guilty because his height is lost on me. There are plenty of women that would love that. I often tell him he's too tall because I like, this is uncomfortable on my neck. Like, I don't.
You're like, pick me up.
Basically.
Yeah. It's something where I find like I am like, if you just put me in a crowded bar and we're like, who do you naturally gravitate to based on looks alone? I would say the tall, burly dude, because as a 6 foot tall woman with a deeper voice and broad shoulders and a big personality, it's rare for me to feel like dainty and feminine. And so to be around a really big dude feels like as long as he's a big dude who's kind, it feels like really good in my nervous system to be around someone who's bigger than me. Like, I feel safe. So I feel like there is something a little biological in it that maybe I feel like that's not super politically correct to say, but it is true for me.
Yeah. It's so interesting that I think it's one thing to acknowledge biologically and evolutionary how we got to where we are. And then also being able to question, you know, is that even relevant for us anymore? Because it's like you can't ignore how you physically feel in the presence of certain people. I mean, you can ignore it, but but yeah, I think there's a little bit of nature and nurture at play with these. So kind of continuing on this conversation about kind of pickiness. So when it comes to building communities and making connections, we all, I think, do have this tendency to be pretty picky, and we create these boxes for ourselves and for others, and it limits the chance to explore something different and often something that could actually be pretty great. So what advice do you have for our listeners when it comes to stepping out of their comfort zone and exploring something new, even if it may not tick every box we think we're looking for?
Yeah, I love making analogies to dating because I find it's something we culturally talk about the most and have the most language for. So when it comes to making new friends, like going to a new community, meeting new people, you might not like it on the first time. Like if you try a dating app and you go on a date with one person and you don't click, you're probably not going to say, well, I'm never going to go on a date from a dating app again because that one experience was bad. So every other experience is obviously going to be bad. Like we know well enough that that's not true. And yet I find with people when it comes to making new friends and going to new communities, they'll go to like, say, a meditation event and they show up and they're like, oh, that was weird. Maybe I didn't like the teacher. Maybe I didn't like the people. I'm not going to go to another meditation event ever again. You're like, no. Like, you could literally go to the same one next week and it'll be different people and you might like it. And so my challenge to people is to, one, just experiment with going into new spaces. But also, if you don't like the first time you go, try going again. And also, I would recommend trying to volunteer if you can, because volunteering at events really gives you a sense of belonging. Like, you've got a job to do. You immediately have connection to the people who are hosting it. It's easier to make conversation with people. It's kind of like my ultimate hack for feeling at home in a space. It's just like, yeah, go and set up the chairs. Go and help people check in. It's so dumb, but like immediately you're going to be like, oh yeah, I've got a job. I'm safe here.
I never really thought of it that way. I used to always volunteer at conferences because I was broke as a joke and I would want to go to these conferences, and they would often be incredibly generous in terms of getting you either free access, very steeply discounted, meal vouchers, those sorts of things. And I have made some of my closest friends by volunteering at these random events and then just staying in contact with them, even though many times we don't live in the same city. And I never really put two and two together that I was often driven by having, not just by wanting to get the free or discounted ticket, but I was also really driven by that like forced sense of community. And also sometimes you get to do incredibly cool things. I got to volunteer at an event once where they needed people to escort all the famous people. I got to meet some of my idols and heroes at some point. So oh my gosh, I never thought about how great of an experience that is for people when they're looking to build their own community. So you're right. That's 100% like such a good pro tip.
Yeah, it's the number one tip. I'm like, you save money, you meet cool people, your social anxiety is going to be less. You meet like all the organizers. It's just better.
100%.
I'm gonna have to try this.
Yes.
So we would love to transition to chat a little bit more about Quinn and Brianna's date. We had shared with you that we had actually had some technical connection issues on the date, such that our normal date prompt got a bit lost. We had disconnections, reconnections. By the time we reconnected, we just kind of like, they were just kind of starting the conversation afresh. And I'm wondering if you think challenges like that, like these technical challenges, can actually impact how people connect.
Yeah, well, I found it so fascinating that when the two of them kind of weren't sure how to start the conversation, of course, the conversation starts with, so what do you do for work? Because how ingrained is it in us to ask that question? And from that, I think they were kind of like really wanting to connect with each other, but not totally sure what question or prompt would lead to a little bit of a conversation with more depth. And so, you talk about like your favorite restaurants and what you do for work and all that good stuff. And I think that's why we all kind of need to have these questions in our back pocket of things to ask people, that they're not like, what's your relationship with your mom like, but just something that's like a little bit deeper, or something that, well, I find a mark of a good conversation starter is something that gives people permission to light up a little bit, like to say like, oh, what's something you're excited about? What's something that made you laugh recently? What's something that you're grateful for? Like, and it's just, I find that what's something that you're excited about recently is a very neutral, like it doesn't sound like a hippie woo-woo question. And like,
and they can take it any direction they want.
Excited.
Yeah.
Truly. They could be like, oh, I'm excited because I had this breakthrough in therapy. Or they could be like, oh, I'm excited. I got accepted to foster a dog. Right. I'm excited because I got a promotion at work. Like it could be anything.
Yeah. I love that.
It's just sweet. It opens people up more.
I wonder if we should use that as a prompt in a future date, Laura.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, feel free to take it.
Do you have any other favored questions?
Ooh. Well, this would be a weird starting question, but a question I really like is, what's something that's a common misconception about you? Or like, what do you think people misunderstand about you? Which is, it's funny because it sounds kind of like a difficult question to answer, but I find people have an answer to that question really quickly. Like, Like a shorter woman or a woman with a higher pitched voice might be like, oh, people assume that I'm not going to be powerful in business. Or a guy who looks a little fratty might be like, oh, people assume that I'm not connected to my emotions, or that like I'm kind of an asshole or whatever. And it's like everyone's got a thing that they wish people understood about them more deeply.
Yeah, it really goes to show just how misunderstood each and every one of us feels so regularly, and how we kind of like don't talk about it, but we want to.
Yeah. I have a friend who she did some sort of like really intense communication training, and they all sat in a circle and said their first impressions of each other.
Oh my goodness.
Like brutal. I'm like, could not. I'm like, actually, if I was in the space, I'd probably do it. But she was sharing that because she's got a really bubbly personality like me, that she said people's kind of negative first impression of her was that she used her humor and her bubbliness to kind of cover some sort of pain, or that it wasn't authentic. And I'm like,
ooh,
how much of a bummer is it that would be multiple people's assumption of like, oh, you're not naturally connected to joy. This is a front.
Oh
That's
my gosh.
Like twist the knife.
I feel like that says more about the person and their assumption about like, you know, what joy really is than it does about the person who's bubbly.
Completely.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah. And I think she said that. She said that because I imagine, I'm sure that's also perception that people have of me. And I think younger me, that was definitely more true. But current me, I'm like, no, I just get really excited to be around people, to be in conversation. Like I become a really open, sunny version of myself when I'm around the right people, and it's super real.
Sometimes I think that people can't tell the difference between, I'm just making this metaphor up now. They can't tell the difference between sunshine and fluorescent bulbs. It all looks like light.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. And because I definitely feel very similarly. It's weird. People in my adult life, for the most part, will share with my family that I'm a very like bubbly and happy person, and then my family is like, nuh-uh. Like because I was a very angry child, and I don't know. I
can't even imagine that.
I was just like, I don't think I was angry. I felt perpetually misunderstood, and it came out as anger and frustration. And I've learned as an adult how to express myself, and it's allowed me to shed so much of those negative emotions so that who I naturally am, which is someone who is like way more optimistic and positive, to come out. Although, Talia, some of our messages.
A lot gets lost in text.
It really does. Like you know, if I say like, how are you today via text, like that's all you hear versus me be like, how are you today? Like, oh. I'm sing-songy about it. Anyway, we digress a little bit there. But Jillian, so I'm curious to know, so if Quinn and Brianna, coming back to the date, if they were to match and they were in the same city, what advice would you give to them to further their connection?
Ooh, okay. I would have them think about dates that would feel fun for them. That this is something that's been inspired by some coaching clients recently, that wouldn't put financial pressure on them, because I've chatted with some male clients recently who have started to feel like a little resentful of constantly being assumed that they're going to pay for a date. And I'm like, well, find stuff that's free. Like, just because you have money doesn't mean you need to spend it on dates with someone you've literally never met before. Mm-hmm. I'd be like, oh, okay. Like, what would be fun? What would be something that you would enjoy by yourself, let alone with somebody else?
I think that's, especially if you live in a city, that it can seem hard, but it can be pretty easy if you just like look up like, hey, what are some things to do in my city today? And Jillian, I know you have extra insight on this in New York because there's so many amazing things to do. And maybe in the winter, it's hard to find like outdoor free stuff, but there's always something. You can go like stroll Chelsea Market, and that is technically free, and you can buy a bite here or there or a snack, but you don't have to go to like a full dinner where you're spending, $80+ on two people or whatever, wherever it is that you might be going, if you're getting drinks or not, whatever. But there are opportunities to explore and get to know, like explore wherever it is and get to know each other without spending money. So I think that's a great call out.
Thank you.
Yes.
I will. Oh, sorry. Just one thing really quickly. One thing that this will be one of the few things that I say New York has a leg up on LA. And maybe it's just because I've lived in LA for the pandemic for so long. When I used to live just outside of the city, I would go into, or the city being New York City, I used to go into the city all the time, like at least once a week. And I remember I would never really have plans. I would just look something up on the internet, 'cause, it's pre, cell phone days kind of a thing. And there was always something to do. And there was, I think, entire lists dedicated to like free concerts, free activities you can go to, free this, free that. Never at a loss to find something free to do and like any time frame that you need to do it in. Because New York is the city that never sleeps. So I will say that that's one of the really beautiful things about New York is that those lists still exist. You just got to Google them.
Jillian, do you want to share a little bit about, your insights on this?
Oh, yeah. So I run a weekly newsletter called The Joy List, which is events that you can go to by yourself and leave with a new friend. And the intention behind it is just to let people know that every day of the week in New York City, there's spaces where you can go and be in community and be in connection. And I curate it to be spaces where usually I've attended the event or I know the facilitators or like they're in my circle. And there's spaces that are really warm and open and there's some element of facilitation. So not all the onus is on you to think of how to start a conversation. There's going to be prompts. There's going to be people there who want to go a little bit deeper. Because, I don't know, there's so many bars and so many restaurants and so many shows, but that doesn't really facilitate connections super well.
Mm-mm. I love the Joy List. I still have to go to an event now that I've moved back to New York. I've been in a little bit of hibernation with COVID and then travels for work stuff. So I'm excited as the weather gets warmer and as COVID recedes to start going to Joy List events.
I can't wait for you to expand and have someone in LA.
I know. Oh my God. I always get messages from people like, oh, is there something like this in LA? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm sticking to New York. I'm not trying to expand.
Dang. Okay.
Laura, you're just going to have to visit.
Okay. Well, that's not a problem. I love New York. I'll be back.
But in any case, another question for you about Quinn and Brianna's date. I'm wondering if you thought that there were any particular strengths that stood out to you.
I think Quinn did a really good job of asking questions, which I noticed that I think there's this gender stereotype of the woman will ask the man more questions, or like you'll see on TikTok or something, women complaining about how they asked the guy all the questions and he never asked her one. Mm-hmm. He was like really clearly asking questions based off of what she said and was listening and was asking from a place of curiosity. I think that was definitely a big strength was him asking her thoughtful questions.
I agree. I think that's such a powerful thing in any date. It's so easy. It seems like it's hard because you're like, oh, I have to come up with something really unique, but really you could just ask a follow-up question about what they just shared. And that is a great way to continue the conversation, show that you want to get to know them, actually get to know them. So I think asking questions is underrated. People should do it more.
Totally. And something I'll quickly add is just to think about like how to make a question a little deeper, but a question you would always ask. Like people often ask, oh, where are you from? And I like to ask, how did where you were raised impact you? Like a tiny change, but the answer is so totally different. People could be like, oh yeah, I was raised in Fairfield, Connecticut. Versus, yeah, I was raised in Fairfield, Connecticut, and like I had totally the benefits of living in an upper class, beautiful space, and it was hyper competitive, and I'm still learning like how to just relax as a person.
I'm going to start using that instead.
Yeah. It's hard to figure out how to phrase it. Like, how did the place you were raised impact you? I think that works.
Oh, I think that's wonderful. So, Jillian, $1 million question, Monopoly dollar question, date in a blank. What did you think? Did you think that Quinn and Brianna matched, and why or why not? And any other general thoughts you might have on the date?
Honestly, I don't know. I'm not sure. I think they both were like curious about each other. I don't know if they got deep enough to really figure out if they aligned in terms of like values or what they're looking for. And what I will say is that two people who sign up to have a date on a podcast are like probably the kinds of people who could meet up and just have fun and see where it goes.
I love that assessment of the types of people that come on the podcast.
Yeah, they're probably going to like each other.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. And then the next thing.
I was waiting for you to share what you thought, Laura.
I forgot for a second.
I did a big reveal.
Yeah. I did think that they match, very similar to what you were saying, Jillian. I think that I completely agree with you that will they be a long-term romantic match? It's too early to tell. I think there was a little bit of awkwardness in the beginning, especially with the technical difficulties that they had. But then I really feel like a couple of minutes into the date, it felt like there was a lot of banter. They really hit their stride. It felt like they were connecting a little bit more. And so I do feel like at a minimum, a second date was on the horizon, whether that's a second voice date, a phone call, or a video call, or if they actually met up in person. But so Tally, drum roll, please. What actually happened?
Drum roll. So they did match. They actually live in separate cities, so I'm not sure where it.
Oh no!
I know we usually try to match people in the same city, but sometimes we don't have the right, age, sexuality, composition. So we do try to stay at least regional. So it's very possible that they, could see each other in real life at some point, but they're not necessarily in the same exact place. But I did think, sharing what, echoing what you both said, that they had a sweet conversation despite the connection issues. And they, I think it's really nice when people talk about their pets, and they were able to bond a little bit about that, about how their pets were, making little noises in the background. So I thought that they, had some moments of connection, and TBD whether it would go deeper, but they did match after their first date.
Yay!
Yay! Okay. So 2 final questions for you, Jillian. I'll start with the first. As we wrap up, a question we like to ask all of our experts. Do you have any quick words of wisdom or advice for our audience besides all of the wonderful things you've just shared?
Oh yeah. I would just say that if you feel lonely, you are not alone.
Oh, I just got goosebumps.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that. And for joining us today. As our final question, how can our audience get connected with you?
Yeah, so I am that Jillian on everything, like Twitter, Instagram. My website is thatjillian.com. You can learn about my coaching and my speaking and all that good stuff. And if you want to subscribe to the Joy List, you can go to joylist.nyc is the website.
And I highly recommend that, especially if you live in NYC, but even beyond, because I don't know, it could be kind of inspiring to see what's going on in one place and seek that out in your own city. So highly recommend. Awesome. And I'm going to include all of that in the show notes for anyone who's interested in checking it out. That's all we've got for you today. Shoot us a message on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at @TheBlinkDate or at @DateInABlink to let us know what you think. If you want to try voice first speed dating from the comfort of your home, download the Blink Date app today. You can also sign up to participate in Date in a Blink by visiting our website at www.theblinkdate.com. In the meantime, thanks for joining us for this episode. We hope you enjoyed listening and look forward to talking with you again next time.